Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Clive Billeness, who is an experienced theologian. He's an individual who's been part of the Church of England for many years. And we're going to be talking about safeguarding today. So, Clive, it's fabulous to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
Hello, Alex. Good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me on to talk about this because it's such an important matter at the moment. So it's really nice to be here.
It's great to get you on. So for people who maybe are outside the Church of England, Clive, or even for those who know of you, or maybe aren't even part of Synod, but are interested in this theme, just tell us a little bit about yourself and a bit about your experience, particularly regarding safeguarding in the church.
Okay, certainly. I'm a lay member of the General Synod and I represent the Diocese in Europe. So I'm actually speaking to you today from France because our diocese covers everything from the Arctic Circle down to the Mediterranean. So it's an absolutely enormous area that we cover for only 6 members of Synod, of course. I've been a member of the Church of England like all my life, I suppose. But I've got a rather different approach to some of this because I'm an auditor. I started programming computers when I was 14 years old, and I've been programming computers ever since. And I'm also a project and program manager. And so I have a big interest in all the aspects of what we're talking about here. And in terms of safeguarding, well, I've been involved in it in various different ways. And for the last few years, I've been acting as a kind of point of contact for people who have had difficulties with safeguarding in the Church of England and they need people to go to. And so I'm one of the people that they sometimes contact. So I've heard stories which come from way outside my local experience, but I realize just how challenging some of the issues are for us to deal with at the moment.
I always think, Clive, that there's different ways that people look at the church and safeguarding. I think there's people who would be classed as the experts, who've got a real understanding of the issues. And then there's a group of people in the church who know there's a problem with safeguarding in the Church of England, and they hear names like the J Report and the Making Report. But there's also a group of people outside the church who just see us as a complete dog's dinner when it comes to safeguarding. Can you break that down as simply as you can and give it some context, please, Clive? Because that would be helpful. Be helpful to me. It would be helpful to other people on Synod, and it'd be people help people with a wider interest.
Yeah, surely. I think the problem for us is that we're such a big organization and we're very often dealing with people who are in bad places in their lives, which makes safeguarding very important to us. And we've been very unfortunate. And we're not the only church that's been through this, which we'll come to in a second or two. But as a church, we have had some very serious problems in the past. Now, I think globally, safeguarding has become much more important in the last 20 or 30 years because until the internet came along, I don't think people realized that these problems were occurring. And I don't genuinely think that safeguarding suddenly came out of nowhere, in 1965 and nothing happened before that. The problem we have now is that history is catching up with us. And as a church, it took us 325 years as we're celebrating this year to create the Nicene Creed and get our beliefs in order. We're slow to react. We're a slow organization. We are a kind of super tanker. And of course, as we all know, we're not one church of England. In England, we're 42 churches because we have 42 dioceses. And the report that we have before us at General Synod next week talks about 85 different institutions that have to be brought into this. So we're large and complicated. So anything you do has a lot of ramifications. And the problem is what we see are the problems. We don't see the fact that a lot of good things happen. We know that many people, and I will say, including your good self, are committed to making sure that it's a safe space for people to come and worship in bad times in their lives and in good times in their lives. But unfortunately, we're not reacting fast enough to the bad things. And there's been a big issue in General Synod about loss of confidence in the leadership of the church. And once you begin to lose confidence, it's very hard to get it back. As I said somewhere the other day, according to that famous theologian, Lady Gaga, you can repair a broken mirror, but you always see the cracks. And this, I think, is the problem now, that we're having to try to repair the cracks and we're trying to rebuild confidence. And that's where the challenge is at the moment. So what we talk about in the next week when we're together in Synod, it's going to be very important in trying to rebuild confidence, because there are so many survivors out there who've had bad experiences. And we're saying to them, we're going to get better, we're going to look after you, and to say to future people, we're going to be there for you.
And what's your view? I mean, we'll come to the technology stuff in a minute, Clive, because it's a very fast-moving world, and things like AI are, well, they're not on the horizon. They're here and present as we speak, aren't they? But there's like I said, we'll come on to that. But in the mainstream media, there's been allegations that people are creating lynch mobs to call people out, and there's blame being apportioned everywhere, and it seems that Channel 4 News, particularly, are almost drip feeding out scandal after scandal after scandal. A couple of questions I've got for you on that is, is it fair and reasonable that somebody like the Archbishop of Canterbury is held accountable for it all? And I think that maybe is one argument the Archbishop would say, I can't manage it all because of exactly what you've said, Clive. There's 40, 60, 80 dioceses involved here. So where does the blame um, begin and end, I suppose, is the first question.
I think, sorry,
Yeah, go for
I'm
it.
sorry. I always go back to the sign on the US president's desk. The buck stops here, and this is the difficulty with this: that some of these things have been extended over a long period of years, and ultimately the leadership have to take responsibility for it. I think there's a growing trend in the world in general now to hold leadership accountable for everything that happens within their organisation. We're living through the post office counters scandal at the moment. And there is an expectation that if you're taking the role of leader, you must be answerable for the things that happen within the organization. And I think that's inevitable. And if you're going to go to Justin, what he did was honorable. And I think that's the word I would use. I don't look at this as disgrace. I look at what Justin did as being highly honorable, given all the things that happened. We've heard words about lynch mobs, and I can't really support that concept, because these are people crying out when nobody else has listened to them, and therefore they will go anywhere to anybody who will listen and who will do something about it. And the people who email me on a weekly basis say, no one's listening to me, I'm being ignored, I'm being blanked. And if you think back to I'm sorry for our non-church people here, but the parable of the persistent widow, in the end, the persistent widow got justice because the judge said, I'm going to have to do something about this because I can't tolerate her keeping on at me about it. And so we're actually told by the Bible to be persistent. But I think we have to be persistent in calls for justice, not retribution. And that's the difference, because a lynch mob just wants to harm somebody. Whereas what everyone is saying here is we want proper justice, we want proper systems to look into these things. And I think that's a very important contrast to draw between the two places that you can be.
Yeah, there seems to be a consistent theme that victims feel they're being their position is being put um, last if and the church, the longevity in the institution is being put
Mm,
first.
mm,
And I suppose a question, I'm, God forbid, I'm not a bishop, but I worry about bishops. One, about the capacity to resolve issues, but two, is it fair to say that the institution's got a duty of care to the bishops to give
abs-
them the tools to do the job properly? And this will perhaps lead us to where we're going.
yeah.
It seems to me that, I don't think I'd like to think that all of our bishops, or 99% of them, are honourable, honest, caring individuals. That's why they're bishops, who perhaps don't have the tools to do the job. Is that a fair, Clive? What would your response be?
Yeah, I think that is a fair thing to say. As we speak, the Charity Commission have just sent out a letter, I believe, to every bishop, asking them whether they believe that they are being impeded in undertaking safeguarding work by any system, procedure, or legislation within the church. And I'm looking forward very much to seeing how they reply to that. Because, yeah, the other thing is maybe we're unfair to bishops. We appoint theologians and we then say, oh, by the way, you're also going to be a chief administrator, a chief finance officer, a chief judge. Is that fair? In that, do we expect too much? If we go back to the dissolution of the monasteries time, the only super literate people in most areas were the heads of monasteries, and therefore the crown expected them to undertake a lot of work on their behalf because they were the brightest people in the area. Now, when Thomas Cromwell then went round to investigate different monasteries, they found all sorts of levels of maladministration. But had we asked too much? Maybe in safeguarding particularly, we are asking too much, that a bishop is expected to be the shepherd to people like your good self, but also then to have to deal with controversial and difficult matters when they have a complaint. And I think that's a very difficult role for anyone to fulfill. So I do agree with you. We do owe it to our bishops to give them the best possible support that we can to help them to do the job and be our shepherds. And I would say, I said this to my own bishop a while ago, we have bishops because if you're a flock, you don't hire a shepherd and then tell them how to do their job.
So this plays into the argument for independent safeguarding then, does it?
I think I think this actually, we have to think of it in a different way. We have a paper before us that's come to General Synod next week, and the paper sort of says independent or not independent. But that's like doing an east to west approach. And I think we need to think about north to south, because what we haven't yet fully defined is what we want the services for safeguarding to look like. Once we've defined what they look like, then we can decide the best way to actually deliver them. Now, there are going to be trust and competence issues about the independence, which we have to come to. But the first thing we have to understand is actually what we are going to deliver. Now, in my background, I spent a number of years working for the fire service, and I've also spent, well, not several, but quite a few years working in technology in the National Health Service. The National Health Service now has the NHS spine, which manages data right across the country to allow it to be accessible to any hospital, any GP, surgery, anywhere, so that you have a consistency of data management and handling and storage. The fire brigade, you think about only as the guys and girls in the big red vehicles with the blue flashing lights that come running up when the house is on fire. But realistically, that is about 5-10% of their work, because they spend the rest of their time going around doing education, checking everything's working okay, making sure the water hydrants are full of water. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done, which is not specifically involved with firefighting. It's about making the whole thing better. So where we need to get to is to have a national service which provides consistent, high-quality safeguarding services, plus education, plus all the other support services needed. So whether they be with your good self up in the north of England or they be down at the tip of Land's End, the same things, the same outcomes, the same experiences will be provided to anybody who contacts the service. Now, that tends to mean that you need some kind of overall so just the phrase, a sort of overall quality of service, an overall service standard. But how you deliver that, that's the next question, because there will be more than one way of delivering it. Now, the independence issue is a little bit different, because that's about rebuilding trust. And the whole issue about what does independence mean, because the difficulty is, of course, churches have difficulty with independence, because everyone depends on everybody else, and the way that people's careers are formed and the way that they progress through their ministry is often driven by the people who will be directly above them, to whom they're reporting over this. So there are two problems. What does the service have to look like? Because, I mean, at the moment, we're spending, I reckon, looking at the figures I've seen, about £25 million a year on safeguarding across the Church of England. So what should we be expecting to get for that kind of money? And then secondly, what's the best way to actually run and manage it? And the one thing I'd like to say is that Stephen Cottrell, Archbishop Stephen, has a quote in the Times this morning on Monday when he's written to the Charity Commission saying, would you please help us? You've got experience from other bodies. Often someone from outside sees things you don't see yourself. And so one of the issues here is maybe we need to be more extroverted than we are at the moment. And maybe this means we need more external help and support. The question about independence, there are lots of publications. What does independence mean? And the European courts ruled on it. British courts have ruled on it. There are international publications. I sent some of them to the review group to have a look at when they were doing their preparatory work. Independence is probably as much about perception as it is about fact. But we have to do something to overcome the loss of confidence that is currently prevalent across parts of the church. And so I think we have to take two problems separately, but put them together.
There's some interesting stuff in there, Clive, and I'm just trying to think how other people might be thinking and what questions that I might be saying. And I know of bishops that would be saying our diocesan safeguarding is very good. It's robust. It's ticking all the boxes. And in my experience, when I've ever had to deal with a safeguarding issue and I've reached out, I found the support and expertise very good. So there's a question there. Are we talking about localized safeguarding, or are we talking about nationalized safeguarding here? And something that I've also picked up this morning in the Church Times is a question of liability. If we outsource safeguarding, is this just an opportunity for us to pass the buck? So a couple of questions there, Clive, I'd be interested to know.
I'll start with the second one first, because amongst my many bits of paper, I'm a qualified risk manager. And one of the ways that you get rid of risk is that you transfer risk, which is when you outsource something. But there's an old saying in risk management which is that you can transfer the risk, but you can't transfer the consequences. So whoever deals with this, ultimately, one day, an Archbishop of Canterbury will face difficult questions about it. So if you're talking about outsourcing, you're not going to ever outsource the risk. What you're going to outsource is the delivery of a service which you have specified. So what you have to do for what we're doing, and you talked about local versus national, and actually I just see one continuum with this, because it's all the same issue, or the same same suite of issues that we have. So you have to be consistent all the way through. Now, at local level, thank heavens, we are blessed with an awful lot of volunteers. So one of the things that has to happen is we have to make sure the volunteers who give of their time very freely and often deal with awkward questions that come to them, why do I have to fill this form in? They need to be supported as well. And as I was sitting waiting to talk to you, I suddenly thought there should be one word on the wall with all of this, and that word is excellence, because we should aspire to be the best organization anywhere in how we safeguard people with whom we deal. We are not the only church that goes through these problems. If we look at the press in the last week, there's been problems in Australia. We know His Holiness the Pope has been working for years to improve the whole safeguarding picture within the Roman Catholic Church. But we have an opportunity here to do something about it for our church, and then maybe later on share the lessons that we've learned and the good practice we've developed with other churches. But I don't think you can segregate the two. There are issues we may or may not get onto today about employment arrangements, but the problem is the same at every level. The problem is always to make sure that whoever you are, wherever you are, you have a consistently provided service, and that you know what's going to happen when you telephone it. When you phone 999 for a fire engine, you don't know where the person is that you phone. You don't know where the fire engine's coming from, but you want it with you now. And that's all you care about, is how the service is delivered. And we need to get to that place where we don't worry quite so much about, from the point of view of the end user, where it's coming from, but how is it being delivered? And is it effective? And we need to make sure we find the most effective way of doing these things. And that's where we should be focusing.
One of the ironies and a great sadness for me, Clive, is that the church seems to be able to argue about pretty much anything. So there's always a different view, and there's a bit of an arrogance I feel within the church that that different view is the right way, whatever. You know, it's a non-negotiable when the real non-negotiable should be that you've described
Mm,
is the excellence and this idea of technological input is an interesting one.
mm.
Of course, there will be people who'll be saying it's not possible, we just can't do it. You know, what would your kind of response be to that? To that, you mentioned
Okay.
the great books important here, isn't it? You know, I presume
Yeah.
the
No,
Bible.
I was going to I was going to refer to this actually because we talked about. I said I would refer to the good book, and I brought the good book with me. But the good book is actually Yes Minister,
Oh,
because these are the diaries referring to, of course, that great prophet of bureaucracy, Sir Humphrey Appleby. And one of the things that you do see is in there, there is the list of how Sir Humphrey prevents anything going forward. And there are 5 stages working around delay. It won't be popular. It's very brave. And then the one that at the moment is very appropriate, which is, but there are technical and legal difficulties, which is always recommended as the one which will cause the greatest delay because they're undefinable and they used to scare ministers off. Going back briefly back before we move on about trustees, one of the things I noticed that that's been said about, trustees, there's liability. Yeah, well, I'm a trustee of a charity and I have trustee liability insurance, as do directors of companies. So that we can deal with. With the technology, things have moved on incredibly fast. And if you use telephone banking, if you use half a dozen other services, you're doing it on the phone because most people, I don't know whether this is a COVID thing or not, with all the banks now closing as well, because people prefer to do all their interactions with services online, either by computer. God forbid we ever get into the stage where you have one of these friendly systems that asks you silly questions, or you have a call center. Now, call centers, of course, don't exist very much anymore because call centers are now a computer, and that computer can be anywhere in the world. So many call centers, like bank call centers, people are actually working locally. They're working locally to their home and they're logged into the system and calls come to them and they deal with the calls and they can move the call around. And I've had one occasion where I actually had to speak to the bank and they had to move me from a center in London up to someone in Scotland. And it took about 2 seconds to move the call. The J report said very clearly, locally delivered. And I don't think anyone would argue with that. There are great relationships we have to keep. But if you can imagine a situation where any safeguarding person is now using a laptop that has a built-in call center system. So as soon as they switch it on in the morning, the telephone calls come up. You are someone who wants to phone them. You have a local number, which is the number for your diocesan safeguarding office. You've also got the national helpline number, because if you just have a question about how do I get this form filled in, you can ring that number. Where those calls go is entirely decided by the computer system. So if you have a local person and you know them, if you try to ring them, the call will go to them. But if they're on holiday, it will then know to move the call onto somebody else in that office, or if no one is in that office, move it back to a center where they can get somebody else for you. Way before the days of all these fancy call centers and internet stuff, I used to work with the Home Office in investigatory capacity, and each of us took a turn once a fortnight to be called what's called pager one, and you carried a radio pager, and that pager could be rung anytime, day or night, for 24 hours by anyone who needed help in an emergency. So with modern technology, getting someone on a line to be able to help you, and of course, if you're using a consistent case reporting system built into it, the fact I speak to you today about an inquiry about something, if tomorrow you phone and you get your local safeguarding person, they can still say, oh yes, Alex, you spoke yesterday and you spoke to my colleague, Harry or Harriet, and they've made these notes. Is that okay? Did you get what you needed? What do you need now? And they just keep updating it. So this is all very, very straightforward. So you don't lose the personal touch, but what you do is extend the service. So there's always someone available to answer your call day or night. And that's where we need to get to with this. We need a local feel. There are lots of local people in the 85 organisations, but we need them all to be interlinked. So whether they be working in an office or whether they be working from home, they're all part of that safeguarding community. And therefore, when you make the telephone call or you contact someone or send an email, you are talking to the whole community of the profession, because all of these people are there to help you. And I'm quite certain that if you had to speak to someone in John O'Groats because you needed help, or Land's End, they would be just as willing to help you as someone just up the road from you. It's just making it possible with the technology. And it's not new. This has been everywhere for 10, 15 years, and it's getting so good these days that you're hardly even aware of it. You know, if you're using a mobile phone, half the time it's connecting through the internet, internet traffic's going everywhere. You can move calls around, you can have calls diverted, you can have messages sent to you. These things are all highly doable. There is no technical problem at all in dealing with things like this.
Well, I like you because you're an entrepreneur, and I one of the biggest frustrations I have is that this comes from my life experience in other employment, is that change.
Mm,
I've learned to quite look forward to change. It doesn't worry me too much,
mm,
but the church is very difficult. It finds this very difficult, doesn't it? And there's two questions here. One is, how do you change an institution that doesn't like to change?
mm.
And secondly, to what extent is our current procedures through General Synod? I mean, you've talked there at length about your ideas, but the reality is to get that done
Yeah.
is, well, for me, I'd even go too far as say, in the current climate, it's almost impossible, because they're the challenges that we've got. And this is one of the huge areas of constipation that are stopping our church from doing anything quickly, proficiently. And all it does is damage, further damages an already deeply damaged
Yeah.
institution.
Okay, well, let's think about change. We'll start with change at the institutional level, and then we'll look at change at the personal level. So, as an institution, no institution likes to change a lot. They always struggle with it because they see the problems. But the first thing to say is the paper we've had talks about a project to deal with this. And I've said to several times now in different fora, this is not a project. This is a program, because a project delivers a new capability to an existing organization. A program delivers a changed organization with new capabilities. And that's what we're trying to do here. The way to get the organization to change is, first of all, to get them to agree what they want the outcome to look like. Don't worry about the process, just focus on the outcome, focus on the golden city on the hill, and then ask, how do we get there? Because there's always a way to get there. One of the things I've noticed in the report is they have said that one of the obstructions is we have to go through general synod processes, therefore it's going to take so many years to do this because legislation has to be dealt with. Standing orders of the General Synod say you can call a teleconference for a General Synod meeting, so you don't have to wait until we all come to London or we all go to York. If you have one item of urgent business, you can actually call a meeting of the General Synod with a one item agenda. So that isn't actually an obstruction. There are ways round all of these things. And something comes up because, of course, it was the funeral of the late John Prescott last week. I remember when I was doing some work for him in relation to fire services. And one of the comments that got made was, well, there's going to be legal difficulties, our legal advisors say, in making this happen. And Prescott just put his cup of coffee down and said, well, in that case, let's go and get some other lawyers who'll tell us how we can do it. So none of these things are insuperable. But organizations have to want to change. And that may be the biggest problem. But I genuinely believe there is a desire for change in the whole organization. They have recognized the issues. We're hearing Archbishop Stevens saying, we have to change things. But let's go and look at change locally for individuals, because we know there are a lot of people involved in this who are opposing it. And they have the natural, is a totally natural human reaction to be fearful of change. Now, that's not a thing I criticize because everyone's afraid of change because we're quite reasonably, they're worried about their own personal futures. They have families, they have lives. Um, the Maslow hierarchy of needs, the bottom need is look after yourself, look after your family. But there's a whole science around change management. And I won't go into all the detail on this because otherwise I'll be making all your people go to sleep as they watch this. But there is a process called the McKinsey 7S change management methodology. But at the core of it is a thing called shared values. And if we're going to try and achieve change here, what we have to do is we have to agree with everybody what are the shared values, what are the things we're trying to achieve. But then we also have to say to people involved in this process, be assured that we are not going to do you down in getting this change, because part of our shared values is to care about each other and to care as much about the people who are delivering a very difficult job as we do about the survivors and the potential victims. And so we have to have a process of change. And I've done this. I've been through this. I have run projects. I had one year in 2012. I had 3 projects that were all 3 finalists for a European award because I'd run all of them. And getting change is not impossible, but it has to be done with integrity and with trust and bringing people along with you and get them to understand the process of change is not to harm you. And I think one of the dangers we have with our concerns about safeguarding is it's coming across as if we actually have something against the people who are doing the work out there in the diocese. We have to make it clear we don't. Ever since I've come to Synod, every time I speak, you will always hear me say, and go look on the YouTubes, I want more for safeguarding. I want more resources. I want more support. I want more autonomy for our safeguarding officers. And I genuinely believe that we can achieve this if we start looking to generate a completely independent organisation. Now, as I said to you before, this is the north, south, east, west point of view to it, which is what do we need? How do we deliver it? There'll be the confidence thing to be overcome as well. Maybe it doesn't have to be independent just to generate the services. Maybe it does. But then we look at the confidence aspect. And bearing in mind that if we do all these things, even if we did it today as an independent organisation, it will be, I know it can't be a charity because we've been told by the Charity Commission that, but there are many other structures like non-profit companies that can be created that are not trying to make money out of safeguarding. But if you had to move that back inside for some reason, you could do so relatively easily. And the key thing is the service would not suffer because on the wall behind me is that word excellence. And that will be the question, which always gets asked, because you should always have the question that's asked is, does this contribute to excellence? And if that's the question that is always asked by everybody working for the organisation, what you come out with at the end should be very much better than what you have at the moment.
Clive, it's been fascinating listening to your thoughts. Just to kind of bring this to a close, you're a man of the Christian faith for many years. Just tell us about that faith and what drives you in this area. What is the fundamental behind all this for you?
Okay, a long time ago, I studied theology as my 3rd degree at college. We were asked to consider a rule of life, and my rule of life has always been the parable of the 10 talents, because I believe that I've been given certain gifts, and I have to use those for everybody else. And for me, my faith is always about how can I serve others, and how can I help others, and how can I make things better, and how can I do things better behind me. I've guided in an old priory church which had been there for nearly 1,000 years. And the people who laid the first bricks as much contributed to what's there today as the people who are now the guides and change the light bulbs. And none of us can ever fix the whole thing ourselves. But for me, this is about what bricks can I lay to help continue to build our church. And that's the most important thing to me is we build our church.
Okay, well, thank you, Clive. And we've got Synod next week.
You have?
Let's hope there's not too much blood on the carpet, and hopefully we can
Yeah.
Our arms around ourselves as we think about the
Yeah.
people that have been affected by these matters.
Yeah. Shared values. I think this is the thing. Everyone in that room will want the same thing. No one there is opposed to making things better. And I think that's the thing we have to keep building on, that we all want to make it better. Thank you for your time, Alex.
That's probably a good place to end, Clive. Thanks for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.